Glad to be here of this amazing conference, and today I'm going to talk about how to craft a polymorphic React component library with TypeScript and Tailwind CSS. And I would like to start with a few words about myself. So I'm Peter, I'm coming from Bulgaria. Here is my handle, so you can find me and connect with me on LinkedIn or Twitter. And I also consider myself as a T-shaped developer and individual. So if you're not sure what's a T-shaped individual, you can check my latest blog post. And here are my websites and newsletter where I try to share at least one per month blog post and on some technical aspect. And yeah, here is my LinkedIn and GitHub. So I would like to start with the purpose of the whole presentation. So the idea behind it is to share my experience and high-level overview of how to craft such a library and package. And one disclaimer. So don't take everything I share as an absolute, because software can be built into multiple ways. And now, the first maybe interesting part of this presentation is why is it worth listening? And that's why I would like to start with a very quick code example. And that's why I'm going to switch to my laptop. So yeah, you can see it. Maybe I can zoom in a little bit. Yeah, okay. So you see storybook. Don't worry about it. It's just a way of how to display some components and to develop it. And here on the left side, you see a batch component. It's a very simple one. On the right side, I inspect the element, and now we see a span. That's the default behavior. Now I'm going to my, okay, let's zoom again. Okay, so this is the default behavior. We have a batch element. But what will happen if we want, for some reason, to render it as an anchor tag? Now I'm save it, I'm back here. Let's inspect it again. And now we see that in the DOM, this batch component is rendered as an anchor tag, if we want it for some reason. Then I'm going back to my code, and now, especially for the anchor tag, we want to pass an anchorref prop. Now let's save it. Everything is fine. And yeah, if you go back here, it's rendered as we expect. So here we have the href property that is passed, and everything is rendered as expected. Okay, I'm going for last time to my code, and now, if we want to render the batch as a diff element, then obviously the diff element doesn't have a href property, and here TypeScript says that, hey, there is a problem. This property is not a valid one. And that's actually the whole purpose of the presentation. And now let's go back to my presentation, and let's drill down and explore how we managed to accomplish that. And while going through the presentation, we are going to answer a couple of questions. And the first one is that, do I need a component library and why? The next one is how to approach it. Then what technologies you may consider using for your package in the library. And lastly, what to be careful about. And now let's start with the first question, do I need a component library? Because we all know that there are thousands on the internet. And in our case, you can consider two things. The business needs of the client, and also whether you have to provide a consistent user experience and user interface. In our case, our client has a big portfolio of different products, so they wanted a consistent user interface and consistent looking through their whole spectrum of products. And this is the reasons why we decided to create our own custom component library with specific styling and look and feel. And then, okay, we know that we have to create a component library. Then, how we should proceed? What will be the first step? So, in my opinion, the first step should be to create a design system. And what's a design system? It's just a set of principles and practices of how to develop a page, a component, so it's clearer for the developers what they have to produce as a code and also as a front end. And as an example, I shared here a few screenshots. So for instance, we have to be specific about the cover system that we are going to use. Here on the left, we see various covers that should be used throughout the whole products. And on the right, we should be very clear about the typography of our web application. And here is an example of our batch component. So for the batch component, it's simple, but again, it has different set of colors and also different set of states. So all this should be put into design system. So every designer, every developer should know about it, so they can know how to produce the whole component. And now we know that we have to create a design system, but before actually writing the first line of code, there are several things that have to be taken into consideration. And the first one is that we have to decide on the CSS styling strategy, because there's vanilla CSS, there are CSS pre and post processors, there's also CSS in JavaScript, and lastly but not least, we can use utility first CSS frameworks. So we have to decide on our CSS styling strategy. Then we have to decide on how we're going to design our components MPI. And there are also a couple of things that have to be taken into consideration. So how the component template should look like, our React component template. Then are we going to use single or multiple props for the whole look and feel of our component? How are we going to render different elements as children? And lastly, how are we going to override the styling of our component? Then we are moving to the technologies, and here I will go very briefly because I don't want to spend a lot of time on this technology. So we decided to use Vite, Storybook, Tailwind, TypeScript, and React. And if you're curious more about why they decided to proceed with these technologies, maybe I can answer more questions in the Q&A or in the break, so we can spend more time on the most important part of our presentation. And now let's move to the first interesting part, is how to create how does it look, the first version of our component. And as you can see on the screen, here we have some types where we defined the props of our batch component. So we have variants, sizes. So I would say nothing interesting here. And this is how it looks like in the end. So we have the props, and in the end we render a span element. And this is the default behavior. Okay. Then, another interesting question that we saw also in the beginning. So, how are we going to render batch as an anchor tag? And the answer is through polymorphism. But what's polymorphism? Well, it means poly and form, so it means many forms. In our case, the batch component can be rendered as a div, as a span, or as a button, or another React component. And we managed to accomplish that through using the asProp, which is a property that gives us a way to control how we're going to render the component from the outside. So the client of in our case, the batch component, can control this from the outside, so they can say, I wanted to render it as a button, as an anchor, as a div, or whatever they want. And we decided to use TypeScript, so we have better typization, and we can pick the available properties based on the asProp. And now let's see how we managed to accomplish that in action. And here is how we come to the second version of our component. And this is the first time that we will see that we are using TypeScript generics, so we can have a generic type for our component. And the first thing that we have to have this asProp. So this is a utility type for the asProp. Then we have another property, polymorphic component props, where we are using an inheritable element prop. This is another utility type. So this is basically picks the properties from the S. So for instance, if we pass div, then we infer what are the available props based from the div. Then we combine that, make a union from the properties that we already defined for our batch component, and in the end we add the asProp. And all this is combined into one set of properties. And here we have like utility type, so it's clear that we are talking about the batch props. And lastly, there are a few things that change from the first version. So again, we are using generics. We have the asprop. And yeah, lastly, if we have something that's passed from the outside to the asprop, you use it. So this is the way how we render the inner elements. Otherwise, we use span as a default value and as a default HTML element. And yeah, this is the final version of the component. This is how it looks like, the second version of our component. And yeah, I see that there are a lot of types here. So there is some, and maybe you can think that's somehow a magic, but we have to just be familiar with how TypeScript generics works and how can we use it in our code. And don't worry, there's this is in a GitHub repo, so you can see this in an example and spend more time with the types. And another interesting thing that we have to take into consideration is how we are going to, what about the refs? Because most probably our clients that are going to use our components, at least once they will need to pass a reference, so we have to forward it to our to our component and our HTML elements. And this is how we come to the third version of our polymorphic React component, now with refs. So here, let's focus on the types that we have to design for this specific component. And you can see that we have polymorphic ref utility type, let's say. And we are using component props with ref. This comes directly from React. And in our case, for instance, when the user of the component passes something to the asprop, we infer its type. And this is how and then we pick just the ref. So in the end, we pick what's the property, what's the type of our ref element based on the S. And yeah, we have batch ref, so it's clear that we are talking about a batch component. Then we have another, let's say, a reusable or utility type, polymorphic component props with ref. We do the same thing that we did from the second version, but here we have to also add the ref property, so it's clear that we also can have this property part of our component API. And lastly, there is also one more additional utility and additional type, polymorphic component with ref, which we had to also define. And I'll show you now why we had to also define this. So we have the props, and also we can see that it returns an React element or a null. And yeah, these are the lines of code that change from the previous version. So you're using the forward.ref function, so we can forward the ref that's coming from the outside to our inner component. And here, maybe the interesting part is the last line that we have to cast it additionally, because TypeScript from the latest version gets very strict, and there were some issues with the forward.ref and how types are inferred. And this is the final version of our component. I mean, the final version of our third one. And okay, so now what about styling? How are we going to approach it? And in our case, we decided to have theme provider. So we have a hook from which we can pick the necessary styling per component. In this case, we achieved very cleaner templates. And now I'm going to show you the actual code. So and here we can see what's the changes from the previous one. So here we have the hook, and from this hook, we can pick only the necessary types per component. And we also use some utility functions like twin merge and class names. So twin merge just gives us a way to overwrite the styling that comes from the outside, I mean from our users. And now let's see the final version. Let's say the final version of our component. And this is how it looks like. So as you can see, we have very cleaner templates. So it's clear where is the styling, and it's clear what's the actual React code template. And now I'm going to share a few good practices that we saw while developing this library. And the first one is that we have to be very clear about the idea, what we want to accomplish in the end, the design, and also what kind of strategy we want to follow. Then it's better, in my opinion at least, to use multiple props over singular ones, so we give more flexibility and customization to the users of our components. Then it's, especially for a library like this one, we have to have good documentation and a lot of example, so it's clear, so it's very easy and clearer for the users of our components how to use them. And lastly, in our case, we decided to decouple the styling from the React contemplate, because the styling is the thing that can change multiple times because the design and the classes changes, but most probably the React template won't change over time. And as a recap, a few things. So just to, we decided the first thing is to use polymorphism and the S prop. So this gave us a way to have good semantics and aesthetics, so we can control this from the outside. We decided to use TypeScript, so we have well-defined types based on the S prop. We decided to use Tailwind CSS, so we have a lot of flexibility and customization because of their utility-first approach. And lastly, the whole library and with the whole technologies gave us a way for fast iteration and quick changes regarding to the design system. And yeah, I hope that you're not bored and exhausted. So yeah, I think that's from me. And that's the end of my presentation. So thank you a lot for being here. And here, if you scan this barcode, you can see my website with the different blog posts, and also this talk and with all the slides will be published on my website. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you for the presentation. Let's hang out for a moment and see what people want to know. Okay, so. Okay, let's start with this simple question. Can we get your code snippets? Is that going to be on your website?
Yeah, everything will be published on my website. And also on my GitHub repo. I did not manage to create all the examples, but in the next few days I will publish them, so everything will be online, so you can spend more time with the types, because for sure they're not easy to understand from the first time.
Okay, great. I have a long one, so I'm gonna read it out. Okay, polymorphism and accessibility. If an anchor can have a look of any component, how to ensure that users know what elements are clickable?
What do you mean exactly? I'm not sure that I'm getting.
How would the user know which elements of the site are clickable if you have polymorphic components, so that the element can be derived from anything? Yeah, but in terms of accessibility, so for people with screen readers, for example.
Yeah, but in the end, the component will be an anchor tag or a button. So yeah, the polymorphism is just the way how we design the component, but in the end, it's just a simple HTML element. So
okay, so unrelated concerns.
Yeah, I would say so.
All right. Thank you. Okay, isn't this a lot of overhead for a simple badge? That's the question. I assume it's because of it being an example on the slide. So I'm going to change the question and say, where do you see the most benefit from using this approach? With what type of UI controls?
Yeah, in this case, I wanted to show you just the most simple version and batch components, so we can follow the different types. But of course, it makes more sense, for instance, for the button, where it can be an anchor or just a button, which is very, especially crucial for the semantics. So yeah, but I wanted to keep it simple, so we can go through the types. And yeah, so for instance, for the button, it's very important to have multiple forms, because we can also use a component of our users that we want to use it to render the inner elements.
Yeah, I see people are worried about how complicated this could become. So do you have any experience preventing over-engineering in that case?
Yeah. Well, we try to keep it all this as simple as possible, and this is why we decided to decouple the styling from the React contemplate. So in the end, when we designed the whole React contemplate, it won't change over time, and the only thing that will change will be the styling. And yeah, I'm not sure how to answer this question. Most of the, let's say, the libraries out there are designed into similar way. So yeah.
Okay. There's also some questions about Tailwind. What's your reasoning behind choosing Tailwind for this? Do you recommend it? What do you think about other alternatives that are available?
Yeah, I also have a blog post regarding on this topic, whether to use Bootstrap, for instance, or Tailwind CSS. Well, in my opinion, I will go with Tailwind CSS when, for instance, I have a design system where I have a specific styling, and there is nothing out there that can satisfy it, these requirements, because Tailwind CSS it's a bunch of different utility CSS classes that we can use and create a very specific, flexible, and customized component, where on the other hand, if we have Bootstrap, then with one class we have a lot of styling, and this is very, I would say, I will pick it when I have to create a very quick MVP, so it's much faster. But yeah, this is just my opinion, and this is how I will approach them.
Okay. Is there a nice way to thoroughly test this type of shape in your code? Like if you have a component that has so many options to parameterize, how do you test all of them? Is it possible to test all of them?
I think so. Yeah, we have 100% coverage on the whole library. So yeah, I think it can be tested.
Okay. Any recommendations, or how do you approach that? Like if someone wanted to start using this in their code base tomorrow, what do you recommend they do about testing first?
To test you mean the component, or how it's integrated in the whole page?
Yeah, if they create a component that's polymorphic, how should they approach testing it from day one?
For sure, they have to test whether the component picks the right properties regarding the S-prop or the different its forms, and also to have a lot of examples. I mean, the test and not only test, for instance, in Storybook, so they are sure that it's rendered properly and it looks how they want it.
Okay. Okay, there's a bunch of questions about as props, so I'm gonna pick one. Let's get the top one. Depending on the as props, the component may slightly change its visuals. How do you approach that?
I tried to think of an example that we face such an issue, but I can't think of one. Yeah, to be honest, I'm not sure. I have to check the code and to see whether I have an example of this. But there are ways to control this. I mean, with different selectors, and so we can apply different classes based on the selectors and the type of, and also the type of the component. So if you have button, we can apply a different set of classes. But yeah, it's a good question, so I have to check it. So.
Okay, so the anonymous that asked the question, please get in touch with Peter later. Okay, one more. Did you struggle with TypeScript speed when implementing as prop for your components?
Speed by what do you mean exactly? From developer experience perspective, or?
Yeah.
Well, I would say that it improved the whole developer experience perspective, because it gave us a way to see how we, let's say, use the component. So because we have also examples in Storybook of how to use the component into different scenarios and combinations with other components. So I would say it helped us in this way.
Okay. I think we already partially answered this question, but let's try a summary for like closing thought. What are the components that could benefit most from polymorphism?
Well, for instance, the button is the one that I'm thinking of it now, is the one that can at least have two forms. I mean, that can be rendered as an anchor tag or as a button. And yeah, I'm trying to think of another component, but it just popped off my mind. So yeah, at least
Okay,
the
so when would it not be desirable? Like what kind of components you would tell people not to make polymorphic?
Well, in our case, the batch component can be such a component, but it really depends what are the, I mean, because in our case, maybe I had to get this like a context. We already had different products and web applications, and the client wanted to have a consistent user experience. And they have the cases where they use a custom batch component, which is rendered into a different set of like different styles and variations. And that's why we made this simple component, a polymorphic one. So when we started integrating the batch component into all the already existed applications, we made this very quickly because we didn't have this constraint to have on the batch component to be only rendered as a span. So this is one of the reasons. I mean, if you're starting from scratch and you start using this library into new projects, not from the ground, then it won't make sense. But if you already have this set of applications, then it makes sense to make it more customizable and flexible, so you can integrate this library very easily.
Okay, thank you. And people really want to know if you like jQuery.
No, I don't say.
Okay, thank you.